Hi everybody, how are you guys doing? Sorry I've been missing in action, partially because it's been really busy at work. So this video is going to be the last one for the year. It's also the last commission work I'll do for the year. I normally don't do commission, but it was because somebody's dog has passed and I wanted to help by commemorating Nana, beautiful dog that's passed recently, and somebody is commissioning me to sketch this for her friend. So let's go. Okay, let's start. One of the first things to keep in mind when you're drawing anything is not to focus on the tiny detail, but really the broad shape, the ratio of the face, the broad shape that you're trying to copy, and just keep it loose and make it such that it is like as if you're creating a little adult coloring book, except the lines are drawn by you yourself, so it should be fun. Things I keep in mind would be also roughly the placement of the eye vis-a-vis where it is in the shape of the face, the ears, and the ratio of the sizes of the nose, the mouth, the tongue, and so on and so forth. So basically keeping very broad shape size in mind when I'm just making this outline. It's not very complicated. With a bit of practice, anybody can really do it, and of course it's a matter of how fast you can do it as well. So for the background, I've decided to put in my favorite purple, which is a combination of French ultramarine and alizarin crimson, the permanent version, and by mixing those two colors, it gives me this rich purple color, and because of the separation of red and blue, it gives it a sort of a shimmer as well, which I really like. And at the end of it, on top, I will just sprinkle a little cadmium orange and cadmium yellow. As you can see, it's gonna be a fun way of just creating a beautiful textured background. By tilting the paper while it's wet, I also allow the dripping of the wetness or the water itself to flow beautifully without having to use the brush on the paper. This allows the watercolor pigment to stay pretty pristine and undisturbed too many times by the brush, and it's actually a beautiful way of painting one layer of beautiful watercolor, and it's really about trying not to touch it too much. Once I'm done with that, I kind of clean up all the white paper edges, so that I kind of paint all the way to the end of the paper. I then sprinkle a little bit of my favorite cadmium yellow, followed by a little bit of cadmium orange. Don't do too much of it. In other words, don't sprinkle too much. Cadmium is a ghastly color if it's overused. Or in this case, they are not quite cadmium because Daniel Smith has long ago substituted all the toxic paint from their palette. Okay, so once that's dry, I go on to the second layer, and the reason why I left it dry before I come back is so that I get a nice crisp edge for this sketch. I don't normally do that. Sometimes I do want a fuzzy edge between the two shapes, so I'll go in when it's wet, but in this case I try to have it a little bit more crisp. You will see that later on I'll create a bit of a feel like furs and hair and so on, and that should just link the two shape up a little bit nicely. But right now I'm going in to kind of sketch the various broad shape, the ears, the tongue, the nose, the eyes, and some of the fur, which is a bit brown in color, and also try to indicate a bit of the texture as well. Not too much, because in the first layer you really can't be drawing furs. The way to draw furs is not to draw individual furs. That's just a wrong way of going about it. So what you want to do is to have broad shape, broad color section, and just go at it in a bold way. From the photo you can see roughly where the browns are, where the shadows are, where the tongue, which is a little bit pinkish red, and so on and so forth. That's really what you're trying to do. And at the bottom, I try to be a bit more loose, a little bit more flexible with the splashes, and a little bit less defined. This first layer doesn't really take care too much of shadow. It's still pretty much bright colors without the shadowy version of the color. As you know, shadow color is a little bit more muted, a little bit more grayish, a little bit more purplish in nature. Later on, I'll add a bit more of the shadow part of the colors to make it more three-dimensional, or carving form into the shape, if you like. So that's what I'm doing essentially. Now I'm just putting broad areas of colors so that it becomes the foundation, the structure on which I will build the various three-dimensional sense of Nana. I think Nana stands for banana, looking at the Instagram page. Alright, anyway, as I said, trying to keep the bottom part as loose possible with splashes of colors, right? So there we go. So okay, I let that layer dry as well before I come back in to the second layer on top. A little bit darker brown. I'm using burnt umber, and on top of that there's a bit of a quinacridone gold as well, so that's a mixture of the two brown, if you like. Second layer over the ears, the eyes. Notice that although the eyes is black or very dark brown, I'm going in with a bit of a lighter brown just to indicate, and by layering it creates a bit of a three-dimensional sense to the shape as well. So sometimes it's useful to do multi-layer, sometimes it's not. It's really a function of choice as well, but in essence eventually you have to work up all the way to complete black, well, or very dark, if you like. Well, the difference between watercolor and oil is essentially you paint from light to dark, right? I mean, in oil it's actually dark to light, so that's a huge difference in the way you think about layering your colors. So I continue to layer a little bit more muted color, slightly grayish for the nose. I go in with the colors that is a mixture of brown and a little bit of a purple dashed dab into it. I didn't quite like the nose being too dark, so I used a tissue to wipe it out, but left a slight layer of gray on the paper, and that will do for now because I'll continue to lay it. The way I'm thinking about the sketch right now is to think about three-dimensional, the shadows underneath the chin or the snout, and just broad stroke of direction for the fur. So in other words, I don't want my brush stroke to go against the grain of the fur. I want it to be in lockstep with the direction of the fur to give it a bit of a feel for the form or three-dimensional sense of the body, if you like. I use very broad washed for the shadow underneath the body or torso. You see that I use sort of a very light wash gray to indicate the shadow. By contrasting paper white on the face, it will sort of indicate where the shadow is hitting the body as well. So this gives you a very good sense of the displaying the three-dimensional property of the dog and or any animal, or or any objects for that matter. I'm going in with a very small brush to indicate a bit like bit of touches on the fur, so that's sort of small lines, if you like. Again, directionally I'm thinking where the fur is heading, and I'm trying to stay in lockstep with that and not going against that. So okay, that's basically the layering of the mid-tones that I wanted to do. It doesn't give you the darkest dark yet, but it gives you a good sense of layering up towards a feel for how to make this 3D looking, right? So that's really the idea. Okay, the next step is to go even darker. I'm mixing in neutral tint, and I'm going to mix that with a bit of the brown, that I've already pre-mixed, and then that's gonna go into part of the ear, and I'm going in slightly with a drier brush, if you like, so that it doesn't go all the way with very very hard edges. The darkest dark really can be overused easily, so I try to be very careful. I'm using a very small brush at this point. So the eyes, the shadow part of the ear, and you see the various part where the mouth surrounding the tongue and so on and so forth, gets sort of the same treatment, if you like, of the dark. And doing this dark, it's just thinking and looking at the photograph and copying where I think the deepest shadows and the darkest dark, but all the time using it very very sparingly, very very carefully, not to go overboard and so on. There's also the idea of separating shapes. So for example, the tongue is one shape, and underneath the tongue, the mouth, and underneath at the neck area, they are also separate shapes. So I'm trying to separate the shape to make it more three-dimensional. So you can see that it's intentional in the way I'm looking at using the dark, and the way I'm using black. It's also sparing. It's very easy looking at this photograph. You want to put black in the background as well, but you notice that I avoided that. It's not black, it's actually sort of a somewhat mid to darker tone purple with in fact that's even a combination of blue and red, right? And so this is just one of the things that you can try, never to just go blindly with one color, but sometimes go easy with the colors by being creative and by being colorful about it, literally. So the other thing I'm thinking about right now is about little touches of fur, again directionally as I see it in the photograph. Where the fur is hitting, my hand follows. It really is somewhat of a blind copy. I'm not trying to paint every single fur. I picked and almost try to be as random as I can, although it's extremely hard to be random. There still will be some kind of a rhythm to the way you put down. But I try to jump my brush from one end to the next and come back and forth, so that there's a bit of a randomness to the way I put down the lines and the furs and the so on, so on and so forth, and that makes it more interesting. One of the ideas in sketching is really not to make it so repetitive and so monotonous and predictable that it becomes boring. And I think the idea of randomness, creating aesthetics and beauty, is actually something that beginners needs to learn. And one of the ways is to have your hand and brush dance all over the sketch paper, if you like. And because our hand works in one direction, I tend to turn the paper around as well. Now, having destroyed all the paper white for the eyes and so on, I'm going back with my Copic opaque white, mix a little bit with color to mute it down, because complete white is also very ghastly. So slight gray, opaque, gives you a sense of the fur, especially the edges between the background and the body. You will see that by putting a few stroke of small little lines, giving the indication of fur, makes it feel like the body is furry. And again, you don't have to fur the entire line. You just have to randomly pick strategic areas where you want to put the little touches of fur sticking out, and eyes would see it and therefore read it as a furry object, like in this case. So it's actually not very hard to paint fur. It's actually harder if you want to mechanically put in every single layer of furs. That's not needed, and in fact that's also ghastly because it makes it look very mechanical and it looks like a beginner's work. Well, unless of course you're a professional and you want to go really really detailed and you want to paint every single fur, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's extremely difficult to get that right as well. I splatter across the bottom because as I said, I want it to feel loose. Now I have made Nana looks a little bit more fat than it should be, so I went down to define a smaller torso or body, if you like. I didn't quite like the hard edges, so I'm going to try to soften it to create a bit more of a soft edges, shapes at the bottom, and that's what I did. I kind of splatter a bit of water at the bottom smear the edges and make it look soft. And now I'm just going in to define a bit more fur here and there, and just to get a bit more feeling of furriness, if you like, into the sketch. A little bit more white on the eye, a little bit more looking at the reflection and trying to make the eye a little bit more alive, if you like. I'm gonna try to fix the nose as well. There's some whites and so on, gray rather, and I'm trying to go in with the opaque gray, because now you can paint over your other colors to make it look like it's a bit of a fur, if you like. Even color on color, that's really the intent. Just remember, with opaque you can paint over other colors. Transparent, they kind of they are a bit of a additive. They will add up and they will give you a sort of a sheen. Like the background, you see the purple color, it's a sheen of blue and red. But when you use opaque, it does color over everything underneath it. So just be careful with opaque. Opaques are really hard to use, but they are necessary for some of these techniques to work. Alright, so I think I'm kind of done at this layer. I'm gonna have to sit back and evaluate what else I need to do to kind of finish up the sketch. It looks a bit incomplete at this point, but you see that it's almost there once I cover more or less the other sort of little touches, if you like. Alright, we're at the end of the sketch. It's a sketch, it's not a painting, so it's a bit loose and a little bit more joyful in the way I approach it, without the stress of being overly detailed and being 100% accurate, if you like. It is trying to give a sense or semblance of Nana for the sketch. Now I realized that I didn't go dark enough, so I'm going in with a bit more a lot more darker, if you like, to put in some of the shadows, little touch up here and there. And as you can see, I'm going in with a small brush. So generally you paint with big brush and it goes smaller as you go. That's how usually watercolors or sketches is done. And because this is a very small sketch, it's like almost like slightly bigger than an A5. I try very hard not to use the small one, but I find that the moment I try to depict furs and some of the dark shapes, and I do have to go to small brush. That's inevitable, unfortunately. But it is good practice to stay as long as you can with your big brushes. That's generally good practice. So I hope I've done justice to the semblance of Nana. It's not as accurate as a photograph, but being a sketch, there is an ethereal quality to it, and it's actually it's an interpreted quality to it, which of course makes it a lot more alive than a photograph. There's a certain quality of photograph, but there's way more sort of creative definition, if you like, in a sketch, and that sometimes creates better memory. Alright, we're almost done, and I think I'm gonna go out to IKEA and buy a frame to frame it myself, and then I'm gonna pass it on to my patron who bought this for her friend. So I think that's it. Okay, let's talk through my framing process. So this is a frame that I bought from IKEA, roughly the size that will cover the sketch. It's a little bit smaller, of course. You want a mat that will cover the sketch. Let me cut this out, and then we can talk through what I do. Okay, let's tear away all the plastic and the edges protector. Open up the frame. IKEA stuff is great. It's acid free, but of course they don't last forever either. It's not museum grade. It does spot, and after many years, I'm not sure how many years, but it depends on your weather condition and so on. Now, okay, so that's how it looks like in frame, and I'm gonna just frame it like so, and then put another small little cellophane tape at the back. I try to use as little cellophane tape as possible. Put my name down and the year 22, and that's it. I'm gonna frame it up and I'm gonna give it to my patron. Well, I have to peel off the protective sheet and lay it down, and there you go, finished. I love doing the framing as well. It's kind of fun, having put all your painting into a frame and see its finishing work. So I hope you enjoy that, and I hope to be back in the new year. I'll be traveling next week to Taiwan, so I won't put out any video for the rest of the time this year, but I hope to see you real soon in the beginning of next year. So meanwhile, do take care. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to those who celebrate, and of course you celebrate New Year. So, well, stay safe wherever you are. Bye bye.